Hi, we're Option Conservation, and this is the Shoe Room Sessions. Grant, welcome to Doorback.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Can you tell people out there who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm Grant Moir. I am the Chief Executive of the Cairngorms National Park Authority. What do I do? Well, I suppose I try to hold it all together in terms of the organisation, lead the operational plan of actually delivering things out on the ground, and I'm Chief Advisor to the board as well.
Amazing. How did you get to that role? Give us a quick synopsis of your sort of career, your contents page.
Yeah, so I did sort of land use type things at university, did my MSc in rural planning, and then spent a bit of time down south working in Cambridgeshire, and then came back up to do common agricultural policy reform for Scottish Executive, as it was in those days. And did that for 2 or 3 years and did the cycle that introduced things like the single farm payment and things like that, which was really interesting. But then a job came up at Loch Lomond, the Trossachs National Park, as their land management person. Went and took that and progressed through that organisation, became their director for conservation, and then saw the Cairngorms job come up, and total dream job as far as I'm concerned. Applied for it as a fairly young guy, we wouldn't know that now from the white beard, and then got the job. So it was, that was 11 odd years ago now. So
And it's the top job, right? The Cairngorms is the epicenter of the environment in the UK. So people often talk about it as the Colorado of the UK. It must feel like that.
That's an incredible place. I mean, it is. It's not just the fact that from a nature conservation perspective, it's an amazing. I mean, obviously the biggest area of highland in the UK. You've got 25% of the UK's rare and endangered species, but it's also a great place to live. I mean, there's 18,000 people in the park, but the villages and towns are great places as well. Always got a lot of visitors coming in, and it's vibrant. It's got a good buzz to it as well. And there's just so much going on. And that's the great thing about a job like mine, is that on any given day it can be multiple things across lots of different topics, and it's never boring. And that's one of the key things in work, isn't it? Not to be bored.
Yeah, I agree completely. It always strikes me that the chief exec role of the national parks is it's almost an impossible job. Yes, it's amazing and exciting, and you have these incredible landscapes you get to interact with, but you have to square the impossible circle, right? You have to bolster economic prosperity and bring people to a park, yet protect the environment and improve things for nature. How on earth do you balance the two sides of that challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the key things, isn't it? It's always that thing about balance. But I mean, for instance, interestingly, our park plan says out pretty clearly, we're not looking to increase visitors actually during the summer months. That's not one of our rules. We are trying to say about in the winter months and the shoulder months, more visitors in those sort of periods. But it is that thing about trying to say we need to work out how nature and people live next door to each other. We're not like other places where you can say there's big areas without people. All our land is managed in some way by somebody, even the places that are our wildest areas like the Cairngorms. So we've got to try and work with the people who live there to actually make sure that everyone's on the same page, and then we've got to work with the people who come to the place. And sometimes there's tensions around that. But I suppose that's the role of Park Authority, is trying to solve those tensions and try and find the right way forward. And sometimes it might be 2 steps forward, 1 step to the side, 1 back, 3 forward, but you sort of wind a way forward. And if you look at where we were 20 years ago when the park started and where we are now, massive progress in a whole range of different things.
Yeah, and we'll come on to some of those. So we purchased Doorback, where we are today, 36 hours ago. And you kindly agreed to come and sit and talk with us as one of the first things we did. So we had a resident and a neighbour event last night to welcome people, telling the people who were right to hear first. And I was able to speak for the first time to that local community. And it's often one of the challenges, because we want to say hello and who we are as early as possible, but equally you have to respect the responsibilities and the preferences of the existing owners and not engage before they're ready. So yeah, 22 hours in, we met the local community, 36 hours in, you're kindly here. And it's that really unique perspective we'd love to get from you. What are the key things that the park is aspiring to do? How can we best align what we do with your aspirations for nature here?
Yeah, so we've got some big aspirations within the national park. We've got a very clear plan that's set out to 2045, but it's got some big things in it. So things like I think it's 38,000 hectares of peatland restoration we want to do before that time. We want to do 35,000 hectares of woodland expansion, and at least 10,000 of that by natural regeneration. They're big figures.
Huge.
We are actually meeting those annual targets. So
And that's rare,
Yeah.
isn't it? That's huge work for your guys.
I mean, we were doing about, this year will be over 1,500 hectares of peatland restoration, and we've got quite a lot of woodland happening in the park as well. That obviously comes in different ways in different years. But we're pretty confident we're moving in the right direction. There's lots of river restoration happening in the park, and obviously there's key things on Dorback in terms of river restoration as well. You've got some great habitats there, riparian woodland that we can do. And then there's obviously all the species recovery work that's happening as well within the park. So there's that side of things where, what you guys want to do with Dorback will hopefully fit in with those plans. Obviously we've got to chat through all the things you're looking to do and try and make sure that works best. And then there's the other side, which is, and I think the fact you started off with a meeting with the local community and people who live within the area is absolutely spot on, which is how can the local community benefit from things as well within the area? What is it that you're doing, and how can they understand more about your plans for the future? Because that's also key. You want to take people with you when these things happen. You want to, change always has rocky patches to it, and that's one of the things. But the more you can talk to folk, the more that you can actually explain what you're doing, the better.
So in terms of this specific area and the immediate neighbouring estates, what are some of the key features of the environment and nature that you can sort of help share with people? And what are the things that might make the biggest impact to improve things?
Yeah, so obviously you've got different neighbours on different sides, but you've got Abernethy, the National Nature Reserve on one side, obviously relatively low deer numbers in that area. You're then looking at one of your other marches, you've got a fairly large native woodland planting went on that part as well. So you've got some interesting stuff around you in terms of how that all flows. I think I was saying earlier that you've got quite a lot of drained peat on Dorback. You've got some eroded peat on Dorback. So there's obviously peatland restorations are probably one of those things. And then there's woodland potential on this. And then how that mixes in with your herbivore management and such like in terms of what the different options are around that.
Yeah.
So I think there's some quite interesting stuff in there about how you can do things in a way that addresses the climate crisis and the nature crisis at the same time, and then how that benefits people. And I think that's a really key thing.
We're really, really fortunate in that as part of acquiring the estate, the entire team have agreed to stay that were employed here, which is wonderful. So fantastic estate manager, Christian, 2 fantastic rangers, a housekeeper and ecotourism lead that's family with one of the rangers, also a fantastically experienced gardener who's done some incredible stuff here, including a breathtaking orchard and things. So it's wonderful we've got that longevity, that experience and that ability to continue to do the things on the ground we need to. And one of the big bits that you touched on was the deer management side of things. How big an issue is that to the park in terms of deer numbers, and how well are we getting on in terms of bringing those down?
Yeah, so overall within the national park, there's obviously different deer management groups in different places. In general, the sort of Bainbridge and Straths Bay side, deer numbers are relatively low. A lot of that has been done because people have been looking to do native woodland by natural regeneration in different estates within the area. So obviously you're part of that, and then you start to get into the sort of Tom and Towel and Glenlivet area as well to your other side. There's definitely lots of opportunities to try and look at what the balance is that you want on the estate.
Is that word again, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So
I was asked that last night at the community event. One of the local people said, we absolutely understand there's a need to manage deer numbers, but I don't want to be in a position where there's no deer. Yeah. And I was like, I completely agree. As soon as we arrived in the estate yesterday, rodeo came straight across the front of the vehicle, ran across, and the excitement, and they go, oh wow, look at that. You don't want that to go. You don't want that majesty and magic to be lost. But I do want to look out this window and see a heck of a lot more trees in the environment than I currently do. So how do we find that sweet spot?
Yeah, and I think that's, the roe deer is an interesting one as well, the balance between roe deer and red deer as well, in terms of numbers on the estate. And I suppose that this is one of the key things, is that you can't do deer on your own. You've got to work with your surrounding estates. Yeah. What are they doing? What are their long-term plans? Trying to make sure that things actually fit together, because deer movements will come in and out of the estate. And I think that's a really key thing, is working with the deer management groups, making sure that the plans and how those things tie together. But it's going to be a key issue in terms of if you're wanting to see more trees, then you have to look at what your herbivore impacts are on the estate and then see what the best way forward is.
Yeah. So we have four sort of key values. It's about environment, impact, adventure, and togetherness for us. And that point you hit there about you can't do deer management in isolation. You've got to work with those neighbours. In terms of getting those arrangements going well, we started as quick as we could last night in terms of saying hello and welcome. What's the next steps we should take? How do we best build those relationships? Because it takes the quality and quantity of communication. People have been here a lifetime. We're going to be held to be here a few seconds in relation to sort of their time period. What can we do to help make that as smooth as possible?
I mean, I think firstly, it's probably about being open and transparent about what you're actually going to do, and actually tell people about things in advance, and actually have the ability for people to influence some of that as well. So I think that's a key thing in terms of being open and actually saying this is what we're thinking of doing, and get feedback from people on that. There's obviously local communities. I mean, Nethy Bridge isn't very far away. Grannon Spey isn't very far away. These are places where people within those communities are interested in what's happening on Dorback, and certainly again understanding that. And then you've got neighbouring estates, and I think that's a case of having those relationships individually with those estates, and then through the different groups that are set up to allow people to do that. So whether that be the local deer management group, or things like we've got the Cairngorms Upland Advisory Group, which is a sort of bigger group that sits across the whole of the Cairngorms. It's the ability to find out what people are doing, and also best practice from other people. What's worked in other places, what hasn't worked, and actually find out a bit more about that, because there will be some interesting practice that's been developed over the past 20, 30 years within the Cairngorms in terms of what's happened around, especially in deer management and things like that. There's lots of different examples of things that have happened that are probably worth picking the brains of other people about.
Yeah. So last night saw was a really interesting balance. So we've tried it both ways. So we've tried taking stock of what might happen in a landscape, because when you speak to people, they often go, so what's your plan? So, well, we bought it yesterday. We don't know yet. And sometimes people can feel a little bit let down. Well, no, we came to see a presentation. It's like, no, we're coming to listen to you in the first instance. That's where, tea, coffee, champagne, nibbles often help in terms of breaking the ice there. Once you've eaten and drank something together, you can have a better conversation. What I tried to do in my opening address last night was to say, here are the things that we think and we've learned are largely universally positive in communities. So we don't make teams redundant or sack them when we acquire a estate. We keep every member of staff who wants to stay there, who's a positive person who works really well. We've never had a forcible eviction. We don't raise rent. We're about welcoming people to an estate, but I didn't phrase it as eloquently as you did about the sort of summer period, but we recognise that doesn't mean everyone everywhere all the time. It's like we want places to be accessible and open, but not in a way that damages environments or communities and things. And then I was able to go on and talk about the things that might be challenging. So we're not going to release birds for shooting. We're not going to shoot birds at all on the estate moving forward after this year. We have some existing commitments that the previous owners made that it's only respectful to keep. But at the end of the season, the rangers and our team are going to transition out of that. We will continue to manage deer. We will not burn the hillside. We don't believe in predator management. But equally, we do recognise there are sensitivities on things like capercaillie here, and we need to have a conversation about that. One of the best lessons I ever learned was from our amazing chairman, Benny Higgins, that said, there's an exception to every rule. And so that's what I want to touch on. So can you talk about capercaillie a bit and what's happening in the park and how we might be able to help in that process?
Yeah, so capper numbers have declined. There's no other way to put it. We're obviously the latest survey data was that we were down to between 500 and 600 capper, almost all within the Cairngorms National Park, and very much being Higgins Strathspey based. There's been a lot of discussion around what are the reasons for that decline, whether that be predation, whether that be disturbance, whether it be climate issues. I mean, there's lots of different things that have led to capper declining. We've just recently published the capper emergency plan, which is about what can we do to try and move that and change that outlook. We don't want to see capper go extinct within Scotland, but we've got to try and make sure we're doing everything we can to keep what is an iconic bird within the national park. Predation has been probably one of the more controversial parts in terms of all of that. What we are looking to do is to take forward diversity feeding at scale within the national park, and that's already happening. There's been some good work done in the Cairngorms unit.
Explain area, people who might not be familiar with the concept.
Yeah, so basically diversity feeding is that during a specific period, when you've got the young chicks in place, you put out basically pieces of meat for predators to take rather than going and taking young chicks. So you're basically trying to make sure that they're not predating at that period on the young capercaillie. As I said, it's been running for a few years. We've got some data that it seems to be working. So we're now going to be doing a bigger scale within the national park. And that's different to going out and saying, well, we will get rid of these predators. Now, there are still people on both sides of that debate who talk about it quite a lot. But that's where we are in the Capper Emergency Plan. And we'll see where we are over the next 3 or 4 years. Are things moving in the right direction? There's lots of other things to do as well. So it's not just that. As I said, disturbance is a key issue. And we've had the Let It Be campaign, which has worked pretty well in terms of stopping people disturbing the birds on site when they're lekking. And
that's a really great example of that balance on an ecotourism side. So one of the great questions I got last night was, what's your definition of ecotourism? And it's the fact that whatever you do has to only have a positive impact. And your example of the disturbance there, that totally isn't ecotourism. That is having an impact on the environment that you shouldn't be doing.
Absolutely. And, there are so many people who come to the park to see the wildlife, and they do it in a respectful way. But there's also times when things need to be left alone. And I think it is just trying to get that message out to people and people understand it. And most people do. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, most people do. I mean, it's just that tricky thing of, you've got a lot of people coming to an incredible place. There are certain hotspots, there are certain places where people want to be. And it's about trying to make sure that also people have the right facilities in those places as well, the right paths, the right toilets, all these other things that you need to do alongside it. It's not a case of just saying, come to the Cairngorms. You've got to provide people with the basic infrastructure that allows them to enjoy themselves.
So across your sort of nature action plan, partnering with over 40 different organisations, that's an incredible reach. What are some of the mechanisms to ensure that communication works well? So often people talk about the thing you need to do, but I think the real value we can get from you and I chatting today is, is it newsletters? Is it social? What are the things that connect to people the best in terms of channels and mechanisms?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so social media is obviously, everyone is doing it at scale, and we're getting really good interactions with people across that. But that gets you a certain demographic.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the reasons that we do a park magazine, which gets delivered to all residents 3 times a year, is because there was also people who are not on social media who want sort of more traditional approaches. And that also works really well. And that's stories. So that's not just stories about the Park Authority. That's stories about things that are happening in the park. So things like what's happening in the Dorback, more than happy to package that up into something that says, well, this is what's happening at Lomond and Dorback.
We would love to do that. Yes,
so
please.
It's those sorts of things. So it's trying to do the right things. We've got newsletters that go out to people as well who want to get, I suppose, a bit more detail. And it's trying to make sure that everyone has the ability to know what's going on in terms of all the things that are happening in the park. And it's really exciting things. We've got a thing called Cairngorms Voices as well, which is just people who are doing things in the park from a whole variety of different
I've seen this. It's amazing. The amount of adventure athletes and outdoor enthusiasts and creatives and incredible people living in this area.
Absolutely. And it's brilliant. Those are the stories that people are really interested in, because you can relate to that. There's like lots of different people who are coming from lots of different backgrounds who are talking about what they're doing in the national park. And that's really kind of cool.
I went through one of those lists and kind of highlighted people I thought were especially cool, and we're going to reach out and invite them on the podcast to come and sit where you are in the throne.
In the throne.
Yeah, just the most decadent seating arrangement we've enjoyed so far. If anyone's just listening to the audio of this, please get the video, because these chairs are quite something.
Yeah, it's pure Game of Thrones.
Yeah, very, very, very much so. Key groups that are we talked about neighbours and other people. What about other sort of third sector organisations that are really important to involve and we can talk to up here? Who would you advise us to speak to?
I mean, there's lots of people to get involved with. I mean, as I suppose I mentioned previously, the deer management groups, but there's things like Voluntary Action Bay next Trossachs Bay. We do a lot of work with them on community development stuff within the area. I'm sure they'd be more than willing to speak to you about all of that. There's things to talk about with, I mentioned, Nethy Community Council will no doubt want to talk to you and find out a bit more about what's going on.
Yeah.
And then there's, I suppose, the bigger things within it. You've got Cairngorms Connect to your south. They'll no doubt be interested in what you're doing here and how that works in with their deer management and things like that, and access and all these sorts of things. So there's lots of people to go and chat to. I suppose it's trying to reach out to as many people as possible. I suppose pulling as much information as possible.
Yeah, in a way that you can manage it.
Absolutely.
So one of the things I said last night, and I loved your you talking earlier about the transparency about what we're doing, which is why we had this podcast to start with. It's why we write every week. It is genuinely, there's so much suspicion about the entire environment sector, rightly so, about greenwashing. So our view is we would rather be judged for what we are doing and how we're doing it and learn the lessons we can along the way. So we share everything we possibly can. One of the things I was able to say last night is we will absolutely try our best, but we will disappoint everyone in that room at some point in terms of communication, because there'll be something they missed. There'll be something that was important to one person in a certain way at a certain time that we just can't do. So we're a team of 30 across the UK. We had 30 people in that room last night. So if we one-on-one communicated with those people and that was the only thing we did, we still wouldn't be able to do everything in the right way. So I was trying to manage expectations by recognizing we are going to try and do our best. Please bear with us. If you don't hear something, reach out, talk to us, ask that question, and we will fill in all the gaps we can when we can.
It's the way you've got to provide as much as you can. There'll be times where things are, I suppose, coming ahead in terms of you're going to make a big decision about something where you want to get in touch with everyone. I suppose the rest of the time it's the sort of keep in touch. Here's information. Here's where you can find it if you need it.
I also sometimes, it's quite hard sometimes because you think you don't want to impose on people's lives. And it's like, obviously people have got busy lives and families and jobs and things. And what we're thinking about one aspect of one field, it's almost, there'd be an arrogance to assume that it's worth their time, but you don't know that person's really passionate about that one thing. So please, anyone who's hearing this, it's not willingness to tell you. We'd love to tell everyone everything. It's just, we don't want to impose and we don't know who wants to know what when. So it's great when we get questions. So whilst we hadn't said anything about buying the estate, we kept it very quiet. I asked for a show of hands about who knew we were buying the estate, and most people raised their hand, and a couple had written in already to ask us questions. And again, I had to say, I'm so sorry, we couldn't answer the question until we could say tonight, okay, our answer to the question is this. I think the biggest highlight for me last night was a gentleman called David at the end of us talking, literally, and this has never happened in one of our community events before. He asked the entire room, he commented about how there's a lot of resistance to absentee landlords, and they heard the estate was being sold. They were worried that would be the same situation, and we invited them in for Christmas drinks last night, and they expected to find Christian, our wonderful estate manager, there telling the story. They didn't expect 12 members of our team to have come up and said hi and try and talk to people. So they kindly gave us a massive round of applause for doing that, which was genuinely humbling, and it just shows the special community you've got up here.
Yeah, I mean, look, people want to know what's going on. I mean, that's always, they want to know that what the bit of land, whatever it might be, is always special to people who live on or near that part. Land reform in Scotland is a live issue. As you know, we've got a bill going through Parliament as we speak, looking at things to do with land management plans for all estates or lotting for future estates, things like that. Not without some controversy in terms of different bits. And obviously there's been previous land reform bills. So the whole thing about who owns land and how it's managed has been a very live debate in Scotland for a long time. Well, ever since the Scottish Parliament got set up in the late 90s. So, it will continue to be. People are interested, and as things have changed, and as different actors come into buying land, from going back from, I suppose, individuals buying land to companies buying land, and what people want to do with that land is changing. People are interested by that and what they think, what will the future of that landscape be? How does that affect the culture of the area? How does that affect people within the area? What are the jobs of the future? Are there going to be opportunities for local kids in the area to actually get jobs in some of these places doing what? And I think that's the sort of stuff that people want to know more about, is how that works. And they want to know that, I suppose, at the other end, if people are selling carbon, however that may be, through Lowland Carbon Code or Peatland Carbon Code or other things that might come along, that isn't, I think you said yourself, that isn't greenwashing, that it is actually real, that it is helping, and that you're getting, I suppose, local nature restoration and everything else, but it's not at the expense of seeing, I don't know, that carbon being used by something that shouldn't. And I think that's really, really clear about who the end purchasers are of some of these things, and making sure that people understand the full, talk about transparency again, but how that all works right the way through the system.
If we start with carbon, okay, which is a key thing people want to talk about in the sector, I think the absence of a price on carbon is the cause of climate change. So releasing carbon into the atmosphere is polluting something. It's having a negative effect. It's filling up valuable space in the atmosphere with a pollution, a byproduct of various things we're all doing as people. If that price was set at £1,000 a tonne, a massively high price, how quickly would we have changed our behaviours? You wouldn't still be filling up your diesel vehicle because it wouldn't have been financially viable to do it. Electrical vehicles would have come on much faster. And I believe markets, as well as creating problems, have a powerful way of solving them. And if we priced carbon in a way that was punitive, it would absolutely have a positive impact on our relationship with the environment. In theory, we should be absolutely fining water companies for putting sewage in our rivers. We're not using that mechanism in the way we could. But if those fines were hundreds of millions rather than £10,000, we'd soon see the investment we need to improve our water and sewage systems. So that's why I think it's really important that carbon credits and a carbon-based economy needs to be a thing. The next part of that is, well, the people who are going to need to buy those are the ones that are polluting inherently. It's not going to be the best, most sustainable businesses that need to buy those at the moment. However, if you look at who have been the biggest purchasers of carbon credits, it's been the big tech companies. It's been Microsoft and Google and those companies who, on the surface of it, aren't the big nasty oil producing companies you'd think of, but because of the scale they have and the amount of energy they use, they need those credits. So I think there is a reality that whoever a carbon credit buyer is, they're going to have an impact on the planet because otherwise they wouldn't need them. When we come to sell carbon credits, and we haven't done that yet, part of our commitment is going to be, we are going to do a heck of a lot of due diligence on these people. We are going to insist on them having a measured plan in place to improve and reduce their carbon footprint and make steps towards being net zero in the first instance. And then we believe carbon credits can form a part of that journey, not the totality of the sum of it. So that's kind of where we're starting from a carbon perspective. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, well, we're in sort of vaguely the same place, which is, we've been working in the park on a few things, and we've got an ethical charter. So exactly the sort of thing, which is that people have got to show that they're actually reducing their carbon footprint on the things that they can reduce, and only using, I suppose, carbon credits on the bits which they can't reduce at the moment, which might come on stream further down, but at the moment they can't. So there's definitely something in that. I suppose the whole thing about what the carbon price is really interesting, which is it high enough to start to make things actually happen? And I suppose that's what's being discussed an awful lot at the moment in terms of, if you look at peatland restoration, to actually do the capital works up front and then do the maintenance, is the carbon price you get at the other end of peatland carbon code enough to do that? Well, at the moment, probably not for some of the upland stuff. In the long run, the hope is that, yes, the carbon price rises, and then there is a balance between public and private funding that goes into that. So we're in a sort of movement of, we know we need to bring in more than just public funding into nature restoration and into solving some of our climate issues. We know that there is money out there, and now that might be philanthropic, that might be ESG, it might be from carbon markets, but it's trying to make sure that all of that balance between the different funding comes through in a way that people can understand it a bit. And I think one of the things is that there's been so many people talking about this stuff that it has bamboozled an amazing amount of people, because everyone talks about it and talks about it, but it's actually having some positive examples to point at and actually say, this is what they've done, this is what's happening, this is the outcome, that people can go, all right, I sort of get that. And we're hopefully going to see a few of those things starting to happen.
So I think we've seen them in the last 12 months. So if you look at Nattergal, they've done an incredible deal. So Nattergal do an element of what we do, but purely through principally a BNG side with an element of carbon. England-based alone, they've got 3 sites at the moment, I think, in Essex and Lincolnshire and Norfolk. And they sold carbon credits to a research institute at €100 a tonne, so £84. That is an incredible deal. I spoke on stage with their CEO, Archie Struthers, a couple of weeks ago, and the room gave him a round of applause for doing that. It was incredible, and it's a market-making deal, that. So if we're talking about those type of prices for a carbon credit, that is enough to fund that work in a meaningful way, and it also makes it punitive enough. If you work with a board of directors and you say to them, it is going to cost you €100 a year for every tonne of carbon you have not dealt with, you will get some commitment to dealing with that, because people don't want to write those checks. And I think in the years to come, myself and our Director of Natural Capital, Chris Winter, we produce an annual forward pricing curve on carbon. we're only doing that because an independent third party isn't doing their own yet. As soon as they step up and take that from us, we'll stop. But it's going to come in terms of showing what the future prices look like. We're going to release our next one in 2025. We think by 2030, we're going to be way in excess of 150, up to £200 a tonne. Then you get those sort of numbers you're talking about, and you get the sort of buyers who are able to take meaningful action within their business. And it also gives you enough room then, because we talked before about how we can make sure local communities benefit from these projects. There needs to be a profit to have some benefit from in the first place. And until the carbon values are at that price, there's not enough to deliver additional benefits. So if you're in a local community right now, you should be hopefully campaigning for a high carbon price, because once that moves on, there becomes lots of different opportunities. Like, so if we go to our estate in Invergeldy, which is the furthest progressed one in Scotland in terms of woodland design and potential tree planting, we've done a huge amount of work with community groups there, sort of official community groups and representatives of those, to ask them, how can we better deliver and help you here? And the things that came back from them was really on access. They wanted access to the environment, better access to the estate. So previous owners, lovely people, but very much a sporting family for their enjoyment, grouse moor, some stalking. The community said, can you open it up? Let us in. So that was a key bit we were able to do. So we're going to make improvements to the car park to allow people to access the Munro there, bike tracks because people want to mountain bike across the estate. And also we're launching something we're calling the Oxygen Accelerator, whereby where we've got commercial buildings, we're going to offer those to start-up businesses at very low rates with the support to say, look, we've got a space here. This is not us necessarily investing in your business. We don't have the capital to do that. But what it is giving you space and an opportunity, maybe some advice and guidance if it's something we can help with, and say, come and access that. The other is a specific intern program. So we have a really successful central team intern program, which is available to anyone in the UK. This year alone, we had 2,000 applicants, which was incredible. Over the last 3 years, we've gone from 100 applicants to 500 to 2,000, just shy of 2,000. And we're going to take 5 placements this year. But those people could come from the Cairngorms. They could come from anywhere. But specifically with an estate, when we move towards tree planting or large-scale peatland restoration, we will offer specific internships on the place. So there's immediate direct impact. And what I love about that is you literally have to live in a local community to even access it. So it is one that's targeted at that community. So they're the sort of things that we can see local communities benefiting from now.
Yeah.
How will that land?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, it is the sort of thing people want to know about, whether there'll be opportunities for jobs. I suppose the other thing that will come up, and one of the key issues in the Cairngorms is there any land that's available for potentially for affordable housing? You know, there might be some options around that as well.
Where would we be in a planning permission situation here? So we've tried to explore that in other places. And actually, in a number of our estates, they've said, no, we don't want you to look at residential, but if you're willing to do ecotourism, we'd like you to do that, which really surprised us. What is the feel here? If we were able to have, for example, we've got agricultural buildings and properties that are in disrepair. If we were able to be open to those moving into more affordable residential properties, is that something the planning system would be likely to support?
Well, the answer to that is that we have a pretty permissive approach to having residential properties, and as long as they're affordable. So more than happy to have that discussion, and you know, we would be happy to have that, because affordable housing is a key thing. That's what we're needing more of. It's not more holiday accommodation we need more houses for people who need to live and work here. That is a key issue for the Cairngorms National Park. So
perfect. Let's put that on the list to chat about.
The other bit, which is just to go back slightly on something, which is, and I think the key thing for me is this bit around what can be done for carbon, and then how you do things for nature. And the more that you do for nature, which can sometimes be more complex, so whether that be, let's say, natural regeneration rather than planting, you know, not having a fence or whatever it might be, these are things that might take slightly longer, but will give you potentially better outcomes from a biodiversity point of view, from a complexity of habitats point of view, from supporting a wider range of species. But it might take slightly longer in a carbon model to actually bring forward some of those things. And I suppose it's that bit about making sure that, yes, we can definitely meet things from a carbon point of view that are good, but that we don't forget that we need to do it in a way that is also good for nature. And that the timescales around some of that stuff is going to be interesting.
Yeah. And
how that plays into people's financing models and things like that, I think, is also something that, you know, we're happy to discuss and see how that all works together. But it's, I think that's one we've got to look at. But the points made about local community, look, things like internships, things about having jobs on the site, business opportunities, absolutely. I mean, if you've got buildings that potentially, you know, startups can go into, or people are looking for business premises, that's again, that's where we're more than happy to, if there's any planning issues around that, more than happy to discuss those, because we want to see a vibrant rural economy. Yes, we want to see things happen for nature and climate, but that we also need to, the other side of that is we've got 18,000 people live here. We want them to have good jobs, good quality of life, and the ability to have businesses here.
That's why we're a commercial business. It has to be economic and environmentally beneficial for people and the environment. So on the nature side of things, so we don't do commercial forestry. I'm not against commercial forestry. We've had some brilliant commercial forestry people appear on the podcast. So the Foresight Group, Richard Kelly there, brilliant guy. Where we are is we're about broadleaf native woodland planting in a synthetic way that works with the landscape. So we will integrate scrapes and open space and mosaic habitat. We will never, ever try and maximize the planting available on a place in a way that doesn't do the right thing for the environment. So far, we've had probably a preference for planting over natural regen. There are schemes I'm looking at down in Wales and on Dartmoor, where we've got a big component that is natural regen that complements some planting. Those places we've had very much a divide across the estate, where regen was great in a certain pocket of the landscape, but there wasn't the seed source or the ability to allow it there. So whereas our other two Scottish estates, there's been an absolute need for planting because of the approaches to land management before that. So we're open to both. We recognise that nature doesn't care about financial years, and it doesn't care about years. In fact, it likes seasons and decades and centuries. So we know it takes time. That doesn't mean we're not going to be having a conversation and saying we would really like to plant, and with deer management challenges we might need to look at fencing, but we recognise it's a complicated discussion, debate, and it isn't one size fits all. It's right tree, right place in the right way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, real. Back to my list of questions. When you and your team come back, so you're going to come back a lot, but if you took a 10-year break and you came back in another 10, what would you hope to see in the landscape at Dorbat?
So I'd hope that, by that time, you think about what is done, then your peatland should all that peatland restoration
Wet through.
should be done.
Yeah.
It's not that should be there. You should start to see trees where you want to have trees. They should be coming through. I suppose what you're looking for is a more vibrant glen as well. The potential to actually have more people both living and working within the place. And I think those are the things that you want to see. And then I suppose you want to see wildlife. We saw a white-tailed eagle on the way up here. That's pretty cool. And then so you'll have more of that. We might see capercaillie in the woodlands. These are the things that you want to see, and
beavers, hopefully, and maybe wildcats, and all those things that make this place so incredibly special.
So there's tons of things there. But it's exciting. You're, as you said, what is it, 36 hours into,
maybe 7 now, but yeah, 7. That's
into the journey.
And just before we forget, thank you for coming today so early. I think it was so important for us and it was the bizarrest invitation I've ever given, because I rang you and was like, would you like to come and see somewhere we might be buying? I can't tell you where it is, and you're like, oh, I know anyway, it's fine. So we're like, all right, we'll agree to meet at the place I can't talk about, and then for you, it means a huge amount that you would spare the time to come and see us with it. So thank you. What are you optimistic about in 2025?
Yeah, I was thinking about this in terms of what's up in 2025. I'm generally an optimistic person, actually. I generally don't see the point.
I think that's so important from a leadership perspective, and I'm sure your team appreciate that too.
Well, there's no point being downhearted about things. You've got to grasp things. And actually, I look around in the Cairngorms and I see lots and lots and lots of good things happening all across the park. Are there things that need to go faster? Are there things we need to do more of? Absolutely. But you can point to things and actually say, we're making progress in a whole heap of different things. So I'm pretty positive around that. And I think I'm pretty positive that if you look at things like what people actually value, the sort of work that we're trying to do in National Park is valued. That sort of, we need to tackle these big issues. And as long as there is support from people to do that, we've got a good opportunity to do it on the ground. And I think that's the thing that keeps you going, isn't it? It's the things you can point at and say, we're making a difference. So optimism is, I suppose, what good things are built on. And I don't see much point in sort of, counsel of despair. That doesn't get you anywhere. It just makes you sit in a dark room and not do anything, which is pointless.
When I picked up the phone and said, Oxton Conservation are going to be buying a place in the Cairngorms, what were your first thoughts? What were you thinking?
I suppose my first thoughts were, I suppose it's that thing of, you hope that it means that you'll be able to think about things from a sort of first principles. You know, when things change, it gives an opportunity to actually have some of those discussions that maybe were a bit tricky with previous owners in terms of they've got a set way of doing things, that's what we want to do. I suppose the slightly worry bit is, oh, is this just a carbon thing? How does that work with the local community? How will they be viewed coming in? I mean, all those things which, you know, we'll sit there and I suppose the proof is in the pudding and all these things, isn't it? I mean, it's like, how does it actually work over the next few years? So
Yeah.
that's, I suppose, the worry bit. The optimism is, well, it gives an opportunity to really have this sort of thing and say, well, what could this estate be? I mean, that's what we want to do. And we have those conversations with loads of people across the national park, whether that's people who've bought land recently, people who've owned it for centuries. It's about trying to say, well, what are you trying to do with it? How can we help? And it's always in partnership. And I think the interesting thing would be the Park Authority owns no land within the Cairngorms National Park. And so, you know, that's an interesting thing, but it means that we've always got to work with people, which means you've got to sort of take it at face value. If, well, this is what you want to do, then how can we bend that to make
Gives
sure
you a real pure independence as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely. But ultimately what we're saying is, well, actually, how does what you're going to do help to deliver the park plan? Because that's the key bit for me, is we've got this thing, this is where public policy wants to go over the next 30 years. How are you going to help us do that? You know, and vice versa. Your challenge back to us is, well, how are you going to help us to do that? And that's where you get some interesting stuff.
I adored having you here. Thank you for being our first guest in the shoot room in Dorback. We're coming to the end of our time, so I've got one final question to ask you. What is the one question I haven't asked you that you wish I had?
Oh, blimey.
It's such a good question, isn't it?
I haven't thought of this. This is terrible. I hadn't thought about this one. What's one question that's me? The question, I suppose, is, yeah, okay, you bought this estate. What can the Park Authority do for us? That's probably...
I think your job's hard enough without me putting demands on you, but please.
Yeah. Well, I suppose what we can do is we can offer advice. You know, we've got a great team down in Granson with, you know, people on the peatland side, deer management, ecology, river restoration, you know, who will want to work with you guys and see what we can do together. There'll be a bit of challenge as well in terms of, can you do things on the community side? What can you do on the housing side? All these things which will come through. And obviously we've got our board as well in terms of, they'll no doubt want to find out a bit of what you're doing as well. So there'll be...
Do you ever get the board out on site?
We do, yeah.
Right here.
Yeah, no problem at all.
That'd be all right. Can we get them on mountain bikes? Will they?
We might get some of them on mountain bikes.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. They've done a bit of mountain biking in time. So yeah, I mean, look, I think there's the challenge function, but there's also the help function. You know, there's always advice. There's sometimes funding that we do as well in terms of the national park that comes through. And, you know, we're more than happy to sit and chat through your plans and see where we can sort things out to deliver that park plan in the long run.
And the fact that you know, actions speak more than words, and you acted by coming up and helping us from day 1.5. So that's hugely appreciated. And that's all we'd ask for. And we're going to make mistakes. We're going to get stuff wrong. We're going to miss something that we should have touched, because you just can't be everywhere all the time. But picking up the phone to me or Chris, you know, Dave, Dan, Charles, and just saying, guys, have a look at this, that can do more good than anything.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for finding the time. And yeah, it's super exciting to be part of the park. Thank you.
Yes, sir. No problem at all. Cheers. Thanks.